So I'll tell you a little bit about the background to the domain, first of all, which apparently was founded in 1956. But the key guy was Charles Mortet, grandfather of Arnaud, father of Denis. And either he or his wife came from a little hamlet called Day, D-A-I-X, which is just a little bit north and west of Dijon. And it's got some vineyards. And in fact, the domain's Bourgogne Rouge comes from there. And I think it's pretty special. It's an area where we might start to see vines being replanted. There is a definite move to expand the vineyards all around Dijon, and indeed to create a sort of a new Bourgogne-Dijon appellation. There are 16 of them. They're having a meeting with the authorities next week, including some people who are replanting from new vines, which places which hadn't had vines since phylloxera, probably. So it's all quite interesting. Also, Dijon Airport has a little block of vines, sort of not quite on the tarmac, but adjacent to the landing strip, which has got to be the only airport in the world, I would think. Anyway, that's by the by, but that's where the Mortets come from. And, you know, when you meet them, you are very much, even though obviously they're now very wealthy because of the success of their vines. So Charles made perfectly decent wines, but they didn't really stand out. Then Denis took over in 1993, and wow, right from the start, there was a complete change. And it's one of those producers who just bursts on the scene in a single vintage, and that was 1993. And I tasted the wines and thought they were marvelous. We didn't work with them back to Morris and Verdin, but they were clearly very good. And by 1996, Denis stopped using any herbicides or pesticides, ploughed all the vineyards, not, I think, certified organic at any stage, but doing everything properly and without using toxic things. As I was indicating in a chat before we started, he was really very obsessive about quality. And so once he starts doing things like that, he does them absolutely 100% to maximum effect. Now, at this time, there was sort of a school of Gevrey Chambertin, which was making very dark colored wines, quite extracted, quite a lot of new oak. And Denis was really, and picked relatively late. And you could say that Denis was very much in that crowd. But the extraction still worked. A couple of other domains I can think of, where I did find the wines clearly over extracted, but there was such a richness in the fruit that Denis was bringing to the table that he got away with it. So quite a few of the wines were 100% new oak in those days. He kept wanting to make finer and fresher and more elegant wines, but everything that he did in that pursuit just seemed to make the wines sort of richer and more concentrated. So that's where we were in after the 2005 vintage. And then very sadly, he died during the year after that. And pretty much straight away, his young son, Arnaud, took over, and he's now supported by his sister, Clémence. And in fact, who are both partners in the Arnaud Mortet label, which started in 2016. I think we're going to have one wine from them. It's Arnaud's work, but Clémence has an involvement in it. And that came about because a retiring vigneron handed over to Arnaud 4 hectares of vineyards. And what he does is he runs the vineyards with one contract and then buys the grapes. So officially he has to be a négociant. So they wanted to keep that clear from anything which is Domaine Denis Mortet, which is either vineyards they own or vineyards that they farm on a farming contract, which allows you to go on calling yourself domain. So what Arnaud has done is he has lightened up the touch. There's less new oak, probably less extraction. He picks earlier than his father did. He stopped using tractors as much as possible. So there are horses, and also he trims the sort of hedges the rows by hand for the vast majority of the domain. So both father and son have been able to work with really high quality and properly ripe grapes. but Arnaud is probably keener to avoid anything getting overripe. So even though the colors remain very dark, I think of them more as red fruit wines than black fruit wines for the most part. They're mostly destemmed, not necessarily entirely, except that Arnaud is more likely to use some stems in his Arnaud Mortet label than he is under the Denis Mortet label. Okie doke, that's the background. If I mention the wines that we're not tasting today, because I thought it more fun to have a sort of mini vertical of Lavaux Saint-Jacques, which is definitely one of the flagships, as well as three vintages of the Chambertin. So we'll be doing a sort of a mini horizontal of 2017 and then looking at other wines older. What we're not having is the Echezot, which is new and came out of the Ficoffi purchase, which is half a hectare. The Mortets have got just over half of that, or about half of it, and then some's gone to Roumier and some has gone to the Chateau de Marcenay, since Olivier Hallé was instrumental in making the deal happen. So he got a bit for the Chateau de Marcenay. The best part of that Echezot holding in terms of where the vines are situated is the Mortet bit. There's Bonnemar, which used to be Domaine Newman in Beaune, which doesn't exist anymore, and also was farmed for a while by Domaine Castagnier, and then went to another investor who bought it for Mortet. Clos Vougeot, all these quite small holdings where he'd make sort of 2, 3, 4 barrels. Echezot less than that. Echezot probably only a barrel and a half. More recent, there's a Gevrey Chambertin Premier Cru, out of which from, I think, 2015, he has taken the Champernay part and made a separate Champernay, but you rarely see that. There's a Chambon Musigny Les Beaubrun, which I don't find terribly interesting, simply because I never really find that Chambon wines made in a Gevrey cellar with sort of Gevrey Chambertin yeasts and a Gevrey Chambertin philosophy of winemaking never really seem to work, whether it's him or Séraphin or anybody else. And then there are village ones. There used to be several cuvées, but now most of them go into what he calls mes 5 terroirs, my 5 terroirs. And there's a bit of Fissin, there's a bit of Marcenay, and there's the Bourgogne, which I mentioned at the start. So, have you got new wines in front of you yet?
Yes, the 417s.
Okay, so 2 Premier Crus, Champeaux and Lavaux Saint-Jacques, and so they're either side of Clos Saint-Jacques, not directly next to it. Well, Lavaux Saint-Jacques is almost directly next to it, but Champeaux is a little bit further around. And what seems to be the case is most people who have one have the other as well. You're starting with Champeaux, and Champeaux effectively means little fields. And instead of being one block of vineyard without walls, it's lots of little squares or rectangles of vines, often each inside their own little dry stone walls. One bit, I think, is in what was clearly a hollowed out quarry. So each little sector is really quite different. Mortets have got just under half a hectare on their old vines, 70-year-old vines. And the Lavaux Saint-Jacques, by comparison, they have 1.2 hectares. They've got 5 different plots, but Lavaux is a more normal vineyard. And it's starting to turn, instead of being east-facing, it's more south-facing, but going up into the valley called the Combe de Lavaux. So it's subject to much cooler air there. There's always a cool air flow coming down the hill. So they got over a hectare of that. 60-year-old vines for Lavaux, 70-year-old for Champeaux. And it's they're both roughly 2/3 new wood, but Champeaux is 60% new wood, 40% 1-year-old, and the Lavaux 70% new wood and 30% 1-year-old. And actually, you had in your original list, if we go on the whole hog with a full number of people and bottles, you had both the Denis Mortet and the Arnaud Mortet, Lavaux Saint-Jacques as possibilities. So, what are your impressions of the two?
Well, they're nice. They're very nice. Very
Good.
Very well made.
So the bidding has been opened by Mr. Aarons with a nice, which has been topped by a bid of very nice from.
I find compared to the Lafarge, we tried the 17s last week.
Yeah.
The Lafarge are lighter. Yeah. There's definitely more substance, more depth, more power in these. And I wonder if that's the extraction point, or is it tasting Côte de Nuit versus Côte de Beaune?
Well, it could be both, but I think, but it's more a question of the style, really. And I don't think either Denis or Arnaud has made a light wine in their lives, but Denis, sometimes I felt that they were a bit too heavy, and Arnaud, I really like the balance in them.
I find the Lavaux Saint-Jacques a little even stronger.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And,
there's more there than the Champeaux.
Yes. It's possibly, I'm guessing that it would be slightly the more mineral of the two. It's the last that they pick because of the cool winds that come down. And actually, when we get to the 2003, I've got an interesting story about that, which will shed a bit more light on Lavaux, but I'll save it for then. So if you imagine you're looking at Clos Saint-Jacques and you've got your 5 growers with Rousseau furthest left up against the wall, and then if you went through that wall, you would have Estenel Saint-Jacques at the top and Lavaux Saint-Jacques from near the top running down to the road. So there tend to be long rows at medium slope as the slope goes round from east-southeast facing towards the south. But all the producers I know who have it, it's true of the Rousseaus as well, they will pick Lavaux Saint-Jacques last. But it has a pretty special reputation over the years, not challenging Clos Saint-Jacques, but it's one that for bulk prices sells at a premium over most other Premier Crus of Gevrey. So I would expect Champeaux to be not softer, but rather more rounded and fuller, but slightly more personality in the Lavaux Saint-Jacques would be my expectation of the two.
generally, how long do you think Lavaux Saint-Jacques takes to age? Because I've had some from even 2010, which I felt still even needed more time from Mortet.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely fair comment. I mean, this is one of the domains anyway where I don't suppose I've ever had a wine which I thought was beginning to get too old. That goes with the way it's made. Here, I'll just read you my barrel tasting notes of these two wines. So the Champeaux, fine rich purple, as last year, the bouquet is a cut above all the others, which included Lavaux Saint-Jacques. Definitely a whole bunch effect with 40% here. So he did use some on that. The fruit dances across the palate. While there may be much less density than the sensational 2016, this is completely lovely nonetheless. And the Lavaux Saint-Jacques, so there's fair depth of color here, very intense bouquet comprising some new oak and rich fresh fruit. This fills the mouth perfectly, is very gracious and extends to a lovely, smooth, even finish. Graceful and classy. So I think in the Coude site, they haven't used the whole bunches on the Lavaux, but they did some in Champeaux, which is pure east facing and with lots of stones around, gets more of the sunshine. So I gave sort of half a point more for Champeaux in 2017.
So Jasper, his style is sort of vineyard specific. He's not specifically a whole bunch or not person. Is that right?
Yeah, he is more not whole bunch. I think he started to experiment with it a little bit more under the Arnaud label, and also because vintages are getting richer to compensate against that. But he uses it as a tool with, as you say, some reference to the vineyard, rather than wanting to make a statement of being a whole bunch style. Okie doke. So if you could only have one of the two, which would you take?
I'd have Lavaux. I like the minerality. Yeah. Lavaux is...
Everybody for Lavaux. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Right, and your other two are Grand Crus, as is only right and proper. One under the Arnaud label, and then the Chambertin under the Denis Mortet label. So Arnaud has got both Charme Chambertin and Mazoyeres Chambertin, and as you know, Mazoyeres can be called Charme. So the Mazoyeres or the Charme, very interesting in 2020, because I was tasting there were a couple of other people there as well, and Denis' mother, Laurence, sorry, not Denis' mother, Denis' widow, or Arnaud's mother, Laurence, sat in as well. And Arnaud was just talking about, he said that the Charme Chambertin of his two is the mineral one, and the Mazoyeres is normally rather plumper. And A, I expect the vineyards to be the other way around, and B, what I was tasting, unless it was a muddle, was the other way around. I was getting clearly more minerality out of the Mazoyeres. And then he said, oh, well, I think maybe we've got them the wrong way around. And Laurence's mother said, I agree with Jasper in terms that the glass on the left is definitely more mineral than the one on the right. So he didn't think he got them mixed up, but he said, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back down to the cellar. I'll draw 2 new samples where I definitely can't have got them mixed up, and we'll taste them again. And bingo, it was the case that the Mazoyeres was the more mineral of the two. Now, I think there are more stones in the soil in Mazoyeres. And when I tasted at, for example, Dugas-P, who has both separately, or we think, who else has got them, Peromino, I do relatively consistent, or indeed Tocno-Mam, I consistently find just that stonier feel in the Mazoyeres. And I mean, I wish they didn't have this rule by which Mazoyeres can go under the name Charme. And in terms of them, I mean, he's got more Mazoyeres. He's got 0.4 over hectare of Mazoyeres, just 0.17 of the Charme. So you had the Mazoyeres, and this vine is 50% new wood, and it's 50% whole bunch. At least it was in 2020. And as far as I know, he started doing that from before. And then the Chambertin is tiny. It's he has enough for a barrel and a half. He has 0.15, 60-year-old vines. It's 100% new wood. And all the wines are kept for a second winter in wood, so they stay in barrel through to around March, probably February, March, April. So I mean, I am certainly expecting that there is going to be really quite a big difference between these two in power at any rate. So are you tasting them?
Very good. Chambertin is amazing. It's excellent.
It's big, but the balance is
yeah,
it's really a step up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should think you guys know about prices more than I do, but it'll be a very significant price step up. That's for sure.
And growing.
I think it's one of the best Chambertins, other than Rousseau.
Yeah.
Yep, it's a totally different style from Rousseau, because Rousseau's wines are so sort of light in color, and there's just the incredible intensity of the flavor, but they're never bruisers. As some of you know, a few of us did a Rousseau Chambertin tasting last Friday in the Pyramide in Vienne, and it was fascinating, it really was. So I don't think there'll be any. I don't think there's any whole bunch in the Chambertin, but there is in the Mazoyeres. Let's see if I can dig out any tasting notes. Cancel that. I haven't managed to find the map to show where his holding is, but
it's not that tight, right? Like last when we did like the floods, right? The same thing was like very tight and it's holding back. Mm-hmm. But when it's very giving. Yeah.
Yes. I mean that's the knack that Arnaud's got. The wines can be relatively attractive when they're young, but there's everything about them says that they're just going to age and age and age. I mean, Denis Mortet, I think his #1 market was the States. And there was this word going around after he died and Arnaud took over that the wines were nothing like as good with Arnaud. And right from the start, I thought they were better. they suit my palate more at any rate. So my note on the Mazoyeres Chambertin, again, this is just a barrel sample. The southern end of the appellation, next to Maurice Saint-Denis, is where this holding is. Excellent density to the nose here, once again, then some oak, fills the mouth with dark fruit, good sense of freshness, enhanced by typical Mazoyeres minerality at the back. Succulent with some discretion. So I liked it, but I only gave it a point or so more than the Lavaux Saint-Jacques and the Champeaux. And I gave the Chambertin sort of half a point more. 3 barrels were made of the Chambertin, so that's actually, by their standards, quite a lot. It's still, that would still mean only 30, 35 hectolitres a hectare, nothing excessive. But I don't think they normally manage to make as many as that. I didn't feel that the colour was any deeper than the other wines tasted from barrel. I said the nose, however, tells a different story. An explosion of pure ripe strawberries, detailed and elegant, really stylish, elegant mouthful, perhaps more alpine strawberries. It's more a question of delicacy and detail while retaining intensity. Certainly quite ripe fruit. So I'm probably just raised the question in my mind whether it hadn't been picked fractionally riper than is the ideal. But from the sound of it, from what you're saying, is it's all showing really well at the moment.
Jasper, can you just explain what the Mazoyeres versus Charme, and the fact that you can call them one or the other?
Yeah, it's just from when they set up the appellations. Obviously, there would have been a historical practice that people did that, but they only really used the Charme name. But if you look at the official map, then they're delimited into 2 different sections, Mazoyeres and Charme. I mean, if you go back a while, I should think hardly anybody, if at all, used Mazoyeres, and it's only now when people want to try to pinpoint exactly where it comes from. So for quite a while, until very recently, you would only use Mazoyeres if you wanted to make 2 separate wines, having both Charme and Mazoyeres. Rousseau, they've got a big holding of both, but they blend them together. So the only people who did it were the people who decided they wanted to make 2 wines. The next thing that happened was that 2 domains, first of all Gevrey and then Roumier, decided to call it Charme Chambertin, Les Mazoyeres, or Aux Mazoyeres. They took different paths. And then after that, a few more people have decided that they want to reflect exactly which bit of vineyard it comes from. So for example, Ben Leroux called his, from obviously purchased grapes, he called his Mazoyeres Chambertin, but the authorities then came and knocked on his door and said, oi, the paperwork, the person, the vigneron from whom he bought the grapes, only declared it as Charme Chambertin, as he's allowed to do. So therefore, because it was declared as Charme Chambertin, even though it comes from Mazoyeres, you can't use Mazoyeres. So he's had to switch back to Charme.
Jasper,
yeah.
Quick question, if I may. Arnaud's style, I mean, he's now been making the wine for about, what?
18 years? No, 16 years. 15, 16, yeah.
Is there, is there a sort of perceptible style change in the way he's been making the wines at a point in time? I mean, could they, for example, suddenly, in 2010 there was a lift off, or I mean?
No, I don't think so. I think that it was pretty much evident right from the start. I mean, so I suppose, so there was 2006. I don't have a particular memory of. Then, of course, you had 7 and 8, which are going to be lighter vintages. But all the time I've been tasting there, my impression has been that it's been sort of Arnaud style from the start. It is true that more recently he has started to pick earlier, but and that is compensated or is explained by and compensates for the fact that the vintages are in their own right, they're sort of typically richer. So yeah, so no, I don't think you. I appreciate that you can with some producers, but I don't think with him that you can say, as from this vintage, it suddenly, that's when it all kicked in.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Okay, now, Jasper, another question with the father.
Yeah.
You said it was a great start. Is there any change between 93 to 05?
No, it just became, if anything, just a little bit more pronounced, I think you would say. But no, I don't think so. Yeah, no, not really. I mean, refined and increased. Early on, I thought the wines were wonderful, and then I began to find them just a little bit too much of a good thing. I suppose is what I would say there.
What's it like in a year like 99, which I always associate with a lot of richness, for example?
Yeah.
What would your judgment be there?
There's a lot of richness, unless some people in the Côte de Nuit slightly overproduced in 1999, and indeed they did catch a little bit of sort of tail end of the vintage rain. But I don't think, certainly overproducing would not be something that you could accuse Denis Mortet of. I don't, because I didn't work, he worked with Berry Brothers later on, so I came to sort of see the wines a bit more then. But I don't have a huge experience of his wines in bottle. Let me just check on the and see. I'm reliant on you guys to supply me with mature top-end wine.
We can try.
With Richard's help, we can replicate the Rousseau dinner you had just the other week.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm just looking. I haven't tasted anything older, at least not since starting JMIB. I haven't tasted anything older than 2004.
For me, the kind of the wine that really epitomizes Mortet is the Lavaux Saint-Jacques. I just think year in, year out, it's always a terrific wine, you know, really at the top of its class. I have particular fond memories of the 93, the 01, the 02. Just, you know, it's just always been a lovely, delicious wine. I don't know if you agree, but.
Yes, absolutely. And he used to have a single village wine called Enchant, CHAMP, which I used to think was absolutely wonderful too. I think he stopped doing that. But yeah, also, I mean, the Chambertin is very rare, so you're not going to see it so much. Whereas Lavaux Saint-Jacques, he has got the volume. Of course, he has a rival now in Durocher. That might be a fun head-to-head battle between those two. Do we have a Durocher fan at the table?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I had that recently, and I thought it was very nice. I mean, it's more recent than Durocher.
Yeah.
The quality, but the bottles I've had have been really stunning. So yeah, we should do that. Compare the Mortet and the Durocher. Yeah.
Maybe Jasper, when you're here, we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just get through my 7 days quarantine and then stay for 6 months and have a dinner every night. Why not? Okay, so well, we've had an opportunity to go through those four. If you had to say which one delivers the most for its label, which would you go for?
What a label of Lavaux.
That's
Lavaux Saint-Jacques.
probably, yeah, that's probably fair. Punches.
Chambertin's the best one, but in terms of the Lavaux Saint-Jacques is, you know, I kept coming back to the Lavaux Saint-Jacques and the Mazoyeres, taste side by side. I wouldn't say that Mazoyeres is that much better than the Lavaux. So I kept putting them side by side to see a difference.
Right. Okay, on we go. So you've now got 4 Premier Crus, 1 Champeaux and 3 Lavaux Saint-Jacques. So the first one is made by Arnaud, 2010, and then you've got 3, 2, and 93 of the Lavaux, all made by Denis. So you've got his first vintage, and the story about the 2003 Lavaux Saint-Jacques, despite it being that incredibly hot vintage, he actually chaptalized it. And when my friend Roy Richards asked him why he chaptalized it, then he just looked at him and said, "But I always chaptalize Lavaux Saint-Jacques." I'd be interested to know if you could look at the bottle when it comes round and tell me what the alcohol level says on the bottle. So whether or not it's honest, I don't know.
13.5.
Yes, possibly.
It's 0.5 higher than the 2002 and 93.
Right. Okay. They're at 13. Yeah. I mean, I think you know pretty well the characteristics of these vintages. So, I mean, I can talk about them if you would like, but it's pretty well known now. And 2010 is just a lovely vintage that greatly exceeded expectations after a difficult and slightly late growing season. But everybody has loved them ever since. I still think that 9 is going to be the better wine when it's fully ready. And that 10s in the not too distant future will just start slightly. They won't really be falling away. They'll go on being good wines for a long time, but you will start to feel a lessening of the intensity in the wines.
Jasper, one key question. Since these guys do, I guess, Domaine and Négoce, I guess that's a way to characterize this, right, in a house. Others are doing that as well, right?
Well, they don't actually do any Négociant wine, except for technically the Arnaud ones have to be called that, but they're still growing all the grapes. They're still 100% running the vineyards. So it's exactly the same as if it were Domaine.
I understand. And do you feel that when you taste in the cellar, do you ever taste the difference between the Domaine Denis Mortet wines or the Arnaud Mortet wines? Or is it difficult to identify any difference?
The winemaking is very slightly different insofar as that if he's going to use whole bunches, it's more often with the Arnaud Mortet label. But I have my favorites. Now, and what we do, incidentally, is we don't taste Arnaud and then taste Denis or taste them on separate days. We taste them together and each wine comes out at its sort of correct place in the hierarchy. So you would have, the Gevrey Chambertin village wine from Arnaud, and then the Mes Cinq Terroirs, whatever it's called, from Denis. But so under the Arnaud label, he gives his cuvée a nickname, Ma Cuvée. It's mine. It's the one I have. Compared to the Denis Mortet one. There is actually a difference where they come from. So the Arnaud Mortet regular Gevrey Chambertin comes from the southern end of the appellation, where the wines tend to be a little bit lighter, both in color and in fruit concentration. Whereas the Denis Mortet ones are at the northern end of Gevrey into the village of Brochon, where you tend to get darker colored and more intense wines. So yes, they're definitely different. And he uses some whole bunches in his own wine, and actually uses some whole bunches in both. But there is clearly a difference between a more floral style for the Arnaud Mortet wine and a little bit more depth and concentration for Denis Mortet. Yeah, he's got, Arnaud's also got a really nice Premier Cru Perrière, which is not a vineyard you see all that often from Gevrey Chambertin, and I don't think anybody else has got a really standout example. His is extremely good. Really love it. So if you insist on there needing to be a difference, then just fractionally lighter and fractionally more floral for the Arnaud Mortet wines, but broadly speaking, they're similar enough. How's the Champeaux 10 doing?
Very nice. Very 10.
Very, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they're just so pleasing. They don't have quite the structure and quite the intensity that makes an absolute outstanding vineyard, but they're immense pleasure givers. There's something in common between 10 and 02, but I think 10 is the better of the two and the more consistent of the two. And it'll be interesting. I mean, you could almost do 10 and 02 side by side, and then 03 and 93 side by side. Remembering, of course, that the 10 is Champeaux and the others are Lavaux.
I really enjoy the 03 and 02, especially the 02. I think I mean, there's a difference in style.
Yeah. I would think that the O2 should be in a really happy place at the moment. I mean, it should be just pretty close to perfection, I would think, in terms of its drinkability.
No real trace of heat on the O3 that I get.
It's a little bit rustic.
Does it have any of that sort of peach aroma or fruit in it, which you often, 03 was the first vintage that I found it, but I've seen it since in people who picked a bit too late in 18, 19 and 20. But some 03s definitely had, if you imagine being in the south of France and you stop at a little roadside stall and you buy one of those southern French peaches with yellow flesh rather than white flesh, and it's just got a touch too ripe and a little bit bruised, and the aroma that just wafts off that peach you can find in Pinot Noir in the really hot years. So would you have a preference, or would you sort of, if you were trying to do food matching, you might use them on different dishes, different occasions?
I look forward to trying the 03 with the hen in a pouch.
The hen in a pouch.
I really like the 02 going with the pasta that we have coming.
Right. Good. At least tonight you're going to get decent pours.
It's very similar. Very similar.
We are getting plenty of good balls.
But maybe the 03 is slightly.
May carry us out.
A slight faster. Slightly wobblier. But the 02 is like.
Yeah.
Straight.
And how is the 93 holding up?
The nose is not good, but the palate is
Palate is okay.
Okay.
I think the nose is maybe the slight oxidation that started to creep in there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's this particular bottle is past its best.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's acceptable, but I think it's drinkable, but
Yeah.
But not exciting. Yeah.
and you've had so many great bottles of this, so
I have actually for many years.
Yeah. I mean, when you go for a more extractive style, it is one of the risks that you get a little feeling of oxidation. I used to find that with the early years of Dugas P, that they didn't age as harmoniously as one would have hoped from the early promise. And maybe that's happened a little bit with the 93 here. So we've now got anything more that we should be saying about the 4 Premier Crus, or
Jasper, can you give us a bit of context on where Lavaux Saint-Jacques sits? I mean, we're all very familiar with Clos Saint-Jacques. Where does this sit compared to that? And
okay, so Clos Saint-Jacques is the one that turns the corner from east facing to south facing. I mean, it wasn't pure east and it doesn't get as far as pure south, but it is the one that has that aspect that sees the sun all the day. That's why it's so special. And it's got multiple soils as well, but since everybody's rose goes top to bottom and everybody just makes one main cuvee, it means that you get the perfection of having the blend of the 3 soils. Lavaux Saint-Jacques is further around the corner, so you've gone across the wall. You're beginning to go up to the Comte de Lavaux, which really does bring noticeably cooler air. So I think if you had a thermometer in Lavaux Saint-Jacques and a thermometer in Champeaux, you could quite often see 2 or 3 degrees centigrade difference in temperature between the two. Again, with Lavaux, most of the vineyard holdings have rows that sort of snake up the hill. And it is a slightly lighter soil, slightly stonier than Clos Saint-Jacques. So you don't get the same intensity in the wine as you do with the clay. So that, I hope, gives you a bit of a, just have a look and see if I've got anything to add to that. Yeah, that's the main part of it. And some people are Lavaux with an X mostly, and some people are Lavaux with a T. Durocher, Drouin-Larose, and Confiant, Côté d'Ido, spell it with a T.
So Jasper, so it's cool because like that's where like the air is coming through. So it kind of the comb, like, you know, it's like, you know, hits Lavaux before it hits Clos Saint-Jacques. Is that right?
That's right. And then the wall protects Clos Saint-Jacques as well.
I see.
It's quite a big wall, that that left-hand wall in Clos Saint-Jacques. They're actually planting some new vineyards for the first time. As you come out of, if you were coming down the Combe de Lavaux, and it starts to open out, and your first vineyards are on your left, but they have actually knocked back some of the forest and ripped it all out and cleaned the land up, and they're planting some new village Gevrey Chambertin on the right. Not a huge amount, but you know, the map says it's part of the appellation. It just was in scrubland and trees before. Okie doke. Well, you've got two last ones, and I imagine you'll want to save those mostly for having with the food, but we can take a look at them first. The Chambertin 08 and the Chambertin 96. So yes. One Arnaud and one Denis. Two vintages with quite high acidity. 96, the fruit ripened but retained the high acidity. 08, the ripening was a little bit more variable. Tricky vintage, which has ended up making quite a lot of quite good wines, but it was not easy to do so.
We've just been served the 08.
Okay.
And I remember having the 07 with Nick in New York, and that was, it had an amazing aroma.
Yeah.
And this 08 aroma, but even, I would even argue a higher octane. Oh, it's is it the oak? Is it the way they make the wine?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's really great.
Oh, it's 96 is also delicious.
I haven't tried these two trumpets like going back to the 17. It's like a delicious glass of wine.
It really is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of power in these wines, but not in any kind of blunt way.
Yeah.
It's all very balanced.
Yeah.
Actually, Jasper, I think your choice on the 08 and 96 is genius.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pleased. I'm just having a look at the tasting that Richard put on those years ago, when we did have the 93, and it was an absolute standout. We had a 90, which is from the father, or maybe beginning to be Denis, but before he'd become the Denis Mortet style. The 90 was okay, but ordinary. But the 93 was a 5-star wine, 98 points, and the 96 was a 4-star wine with 4-star wine, 96 points. That tasting was in November of 2010, and we didn't go. The youngest wine we had then was the 2006, so we didn't have the 08. Wouldn't have been ready. Let's have a look and see what my 96 notes are. Full rich color, though, with a little browning. The nose has some initial vegetal notes that blow off. That's quite typical of 96, actually. And a slight leatheriness from the tannins, then a little oak. Still very unsure of itself. Exceptionally youthful on the palate. The volume is certainly there. The acidity of the year is beginning to be tamed, but it's done its job in keeping the wine together. Fruit becomes increasingly youthful and purer as the wine reacts to the air. This wine starts in doubt, but finishes in glory. A classic example of 1996. There you go. So interesting to see how it is now 12 years later. So at least at this stage, and you may easily change your minds later on with food in another hour and a half, but which would give you more pleasure, 08 or 96?
The 08 to start with, but I might come around to 96. I really enjoy it. I remember you said to me a long time ago that 08 was a good food wine because of the high levels of acidity.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed trying that food wine. I think the 08 to me has just a lovely purity of fruit.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think actually it's a really, sure, the vintages play and the age of the wine plays, but I think you probably have a pretty good definition of the difference between Arnaud and Denis, between those two. And therefore you understand why, much as I like Denis as a person, I like his wines, but I prefer what Arnaud is doing even more, I would say. I mean, that little conversation actually has reminded me that there is another member of the family, another son of Charles Mortet, so therefore brother of Denis, who is Thierry Mortet,
who's a delightful chap, very shy, doesn't, his wines are very much under the radar, and they're clearly a lighter style. He doesn't have as many vineyards, he doesn't have the Grand Crus. He's more village and a little bit of Premier Cru. But if you like the wines of sort of Henri Jouan or Jacques Truchot, that really quite light but quite fine style, then Thierry Mortet is worth having a look at. And I think that sometimes the wines might have been a tiny bit undernourished, but in these warmer vintages, then his style and with the vintage comes into play that much more. So just worth a thought. But it's not a name that's normally cited amongst the leaders, but I suspect that he's maybe a little bit underappreciated. Good. Well, it sounds as though not enough of you, but you get more wine, and it sounds as though the wines are doing their job. Enjoy, and I will see you next time.